Now, Mark David Chapman is, of course, a figure of great hate to a lot of people, and I think one of the reasons that he's never been released from prison is that it's felt that as soon as he's released, a Beatles fan is going to shoot him and earn themselves a life sentence. I may have put that in the story, I can't remember, but I'm telling you that now. Personally, I'm not one of the people that thinks that Mark Chapman is evil scum that should rot in hell. Part of the reason for this is not because I have any special knowledge about him, although I would alert you to watch a documentary on YouTube called The Man Who Shot John Lennon, made in 1988. And I think, before passing judgment on Chapman for this one obviously heinous act, it might be worth looking at the whole person. There were a lot of people in this documentary who loved Mark David Chapman, who thought he was a very nice person. A lot of his actions did seem to be very benevolent. I think he was a person who wanted to do good but got very, very misguided and got a particular idea about a superstar and formed a dangerous link with this superstar and then committed a heinous crime. There's also an interview with Chapman on the Larry King show. And I mean, I don't know what your opinion of Larry King is, but he's a very establishment figure, obviously, but he has the idea that journalists should be totally neutral and shouldn't really have any opinions. He recently had an interview himself with Abby Martin on RT, Russia Today, and Abby Martin's a person I admire a lot. She's a very progressive journalist, and not afraid of giving opinions, and well-researched. Larry King shows his complete ignorance of some of the dark things that have been done to government. So essentially his let's say objective, quote-unquote objective style of journalism is basically not to really research anything and just to take everything at face value. He interviews Chapman, and you can find that on YouTube as well, and has a very, very matter-of-fact and starts asking questions like, did Yoko scream when you shot John? Things like that. That's not his accent, by the way. But it's very, not an interview that I like watching for any reason at all. But yeah, it might be worth researching Mark David Chapman. Probably the best film made about him, made with actors, was The Killing of John Lennon, which was a less high-profile one that came out at the same time, called Chapter 27, but I'd recommend The Killing of John Lennon. That's quite an interesting film. So here's the story. The rather strange last day in the life of John Lennon. First, the facts as they are known. John Lennon was born in 1940 and died in 1980, 2 months after his 40th birthday. It's fair to say that he packed a lot of living into his half a lifetime, and it's also universally acknowledged that his death in New York on Monday, December the 8th, 1980, came as a huge shock worldwide, prompting a mass outpouring of grief which seemed to be particularly strong in America, more so than in England, the place of Lennon's birth. Inevitably there have been rumours about whether it really was a quote-unquote lone assassin or lone nutter, as seems to be so often the case in high-profile American murder cases, or on the other hand, but it's fair to say that Lennon and Yoko Ono almost certainly didn't know that anything out of the ordinary was going to happen on that day. Just a quick word about the possibility that it wasn't a lone assassin. All I would say about that, I'm not going to be analysing the possibility of that in this particular story. I'm going to presume that the official story was as it was told. But obviously there were three lone nutter killings in the 1960s, the big three, you might call them: John F. Kennedy, Martin Luther King and Bobby Kennedy, all of which are extremely questionable in terms of the official versions. And there's implications of mind control, MK Ultra, certainly in the case of Sirhan Sirhan, who killed Bobby Kennedy. So I certainly wouldn't rule it out, but that's probably a story or a debate for another day. Back to the story. What's also strange about that day is that it seemed to play out as both a microcosm of an epilogue to Lennon's life, as it will be seen. It might be expected that on an otherwise ordinary day in the life of a rock superstar, the star himself would not be particularly visible, and we probably wouldn't have photos of him, audio of his voice, or a picture of him signing an autograph for a fan. But we have all three and more. Lennon's movements on that day, up to the moment of truth, are now well known. He started the day with coffee at La Fortuna, a favourite local cafe of his, and the events of the rest of the day make quite eerie reading in retrospect. The haircut. Fairly innocuous in itself, but Lennon happened to choose this day to have a throwback 50s style faux teddy boy haircut, as well as wearing a leather jacket throughout the day. The 50s were his years of teenage development, the seminal period of his life, and his love for Elvis, Chuck Berry, Little Richard and the rest were some of the main reasons why ultimately the Beatles happened. He had recently taken to wearing his old school tie and had recorded his comeback single, Just Like Starting Over, in a vocal style that he called, quote, Elvis Orbison. The photo shoot. In the late morning, John and Yoko did a photo session with well-known New York photographer Annie Leibovitz. Easily the most famous shot to emerge from this session was one of a fully naked John Lennon in a fetal embrace with a fully clad Yoko Ono. "That's it, that's our relationship," said Lennon after the photo had been posed for. In the story I've enclosed a link to the photo itself, and it is quite remarkable for a rock star, particularly someone who was of the age 40 rather than in his physical prime. But it's quite a remarkable photo, so I'd recommend you looking at that. The idea of being a naked artist, both literally, artistically and spiritually, had been perhaps the second greatest theme of his life and work after rock and roll. In the mid-60s, after the thrill of Beatles fame had long since become more of an empty irritation than a glorious thrill, he'd gone into a drug-addled period of seclusion, broken only by Beatle commitments, before he started a relationship with Yoko, who, like her or hate her, did seem to bring it back to life. From then to the end of his life, he considered himself an artist, open to ideas and willing to lay himself bare, literally or otherwise, before his audience. He had, of course, been pictured naked before, with Yoko in a similar state for the cover of their barely listenable concept art album, Two Virgins. At that time, the picture seemed to be of two people reduced to a childlike state of innocence in the glow of their new love. But 12 years later, with Lennon alone in the virginal state and having dubbed Yoko Mother some years back, the balance of power in their relationship seemed clear. John and Yoko had also recently shot a video of them naked, simulating lovemaking to promote one of their latest songs. The interview. Between 1 and 4 p.m. on December the 8th, 1980, Dave Sholin became the recipient of John Lennon's final art interview, held in one of the vast rooms of John and Yoko's many apartments in the Gothic Dakota building, located at West 72nd Street, New York, and formerly the setting for the film Rosemary's Baby, made in 1968 by Roman Polanski. 1 year after the film, Polanski's pregnant wife, Sharon Tate, was butchered by the Manson family, who wrote in Tate's blood near her body, Helter Skelter, the name of a Beatles song from their most recent album. Lennon was late getting back for the interview, apologising and announcing that Annie Leibovitz had wanted one more shot before he was free to leave. Yoko had taken the floor before his arrival. In the 3-hour Sholin interview, John Lennon, with literally hours to live, ran through a potted history of his whole life, from his troubled family history to the famous meetings with Paul McCartney and Yoko Ono, to his hopes for the future of himself and mankind. Towards the end of the interview, John Lennon announced that, quote, "I always consider my work to be one piece, and it won't be finished until I'm dead and buried, and I hope that's a long, long time." Lennon seemed upbeat to all who knew him at this time, while others believe he was actually clinically depressed and addicted to very potent pharmaceuticals. In my own opinion, he sounds either high on life or cocaine. But again, listen to the interview, there's a link at the end of this section. Make up your own mind. His excessively thin frame was either a result of a healthy diet or a return to heroin addiction. At this very moment in time, a 25-year-old from Georgia, now based in Hawaii, a world away from the superstar John Lennon in terms of status and the love of others, was very close to him, standing outside the Dakota apartment chatting to other fans, as well as an amateur photographer of Lennon's acquaintance called Paul Goresh. Mark David Chapman, by his own admission, was holding a gun in his pocket in the crisp December air, waiting for one of the voices in his head, God or Satan, to step forward and help determine the course of his actions and his and Lennon's destinies, just as Lennon spoke those last words. As I mentioned in the blog post, there's a link to the audio of Lennon's interview, which makes extremely eerie listening. And it might be worth reflecting on the fact of John Lennon talking about his life, and particularly talking about, he said after Christmas he was going to tour with a band, and talking excitedly about his plans for the future, where just outside the same building was someone who was potentially going to end John Lennon's life. I think it's fair to say, from my knowledge of the case, that there was a chance that Mark David Chapman wasn't going to do what he eventually did. He did seem to be oscillating between the God and Satan voices in his head.